Praised be Jesus and Mary. Do not be called Rabbi, call no man Father, call no man Master. Today's Gospel, our Lord tells us that we should not usurp for ourselves what God has not given us. Neither should we attribute to ourselves as if coming from ourselves what in reality comes from God. Anything else would be pride and vanity, to try to take for ourselves what is not ours, what has not been given to us by God, or to think that what God has given us comes from us and not from God is self-deception. Now, thinking about that, and also in connection with the first reading, Isaiah speaking of how God can forgive any sin. And as a reference point, he has Sodom and Gomorrah. Putting these two readings together, I thought to connect our Lord's words with the question, not really a question, but the issue of gender pronouns. Our Lord says, don't take for yourself what God has not given to you. Don't think that what God has given you comes from yourself, but recognize it comes from God. The question arises, well, may we use a gender pronoun of somebody's choice when it doesn't correspond to the reality about that person's real, God-given biological sex? In my opinion, to do so, to actually knowingly and willingly refer to somebody by a pronoun that does not correspond to his actual God-given sex, man or woman, goes beyond mere courtesy and civility. It would be a response to that person's search for affirmation of his own personal disorientation. Therefore, I don't think it is ever okay to do so, precisely because in most instances, in the vast majority of instances, the person who makes use of such a pronoun, a man who wants to be called a she, a woman who wants to be called a he, or men and women who invent pronouns and descriptions of themselves, seek affirmation in their disorientation. And along with that affirmation that we would give, we would be affirming also a slew of other errors about just human sexuality, human sexual activity, the right ordering of man to woman, woman to man. And that's an affirmation that we shouldn't give. Because while gender dysphoria, just to use that broad category, is, my goodness, it's a terrible suffering, it's a terrible insecurity that requires loving accompaniment, as even the Catechism says. Persons with same-sex attraction and the like need accompaniment, but an accompaniment not into the disorientation, not deeper into the deception, not deeper into the suffering, but out of it. An affirmation out of the disorientation, an affirmation of the fact that, my goodness, God has created us beautifully, men and women, and these differences are based on physical, moral, and spiritual difference and complementarity. Physical, moral, spiritual, difference and complementarity that don't depend on our wills, on our self-image, but on the reality, on what God has truly given us, the beautiful things that God has given us. It's also the Catechism, by the way, paragraph 2333. So, having said that, practical pointers, practical guidance maybe. We live in a world where it's a thing nowadays. It still is, I think. Gender pronouns and the celebration of, transgender and the like. What do we do when faced with that? So, one, it would be wrong to knowingly and willingly affirm somebody in his or her disorientation. If, however, we can't be sure of the situation, that is different. So, to the extent that we are not sure of the person's actual biological sex, and we might just be completely deceived because the externals might correspond to the disorientation pretty well, or we might just have a very vague, maybe suspicion. You can, so to speak, go along because, again, there's no reason to accuse the person rashly. Oh, you're really a woman. You might be wrong. You know, there's instances when it's really tough to tell, and it wouldn't be proper to rashly, all of a sudden, in public, accuse somebody of being really a man or really a woman, because you might really be wrong. By analogy, everybody who puts on a convincing public appearance of being husband and wife may be called husband and wife, even though in reality, let's say two Catholics married outside of the church, even though in reality they are not husband and wife. If for the sake of public appearances, they give a convincing show of being husband and wife, and you have really no reason to suspect or no proof to the contrary, you go along and you say, okay, husband and wife, that's what it looks like. That's all I know. All I know is what it looks like. So in those instances, well, you know, we're in that category where, okay, you go along with appearances when they're that convincing. If the suspicion is so strong, or if you have certainty that the pronoun doesn't correspond to reality, but it's just not proper to insist, okay, I know you're really a woman, so I'm going to insist and call you a she even though you want to be a he. If it's not appropriate to do that, you know, you can just avoid pronouns altogether. That might be almost as awkward as insisting on reality, but it's a step away from actually, so to speak, unmasking or accusing somebody in public. So just avoiding pronouns altogether. It would be awkward, but it is an option. Referring to somebody as, okay, rather than he or she, okay, this person, that person, the waiter, the teacher, the police officer, the actor, whatever. It's still going to be awkward, but at least it's not as so to speak, as much of a conflict. If, however, again, and the point is, if however we know what the reality is, and somebody's asking us to affirm them in a disorientation about the reality, we should not go along with that. And that is true all the more. That the more that person has a close relationship with us, the more we have a duty to know, the more the person expects us to know. So think of family, relatives, children, siblings, even close friends. The more that person is close to us, the more we have a duty to speak the truth, but always in charity, the way we would want that truth to be told to us. Not so much necessarily focusing on the denial of what that person thinks of himself. Part of it is that. It's a refusal to affirm a false self-image that the other person has. Not necessarily focusing on that so much, but affirming the real image that person should have about himself, herself. Affirming what God has given to that person. And helping that person to see the beauty of what God has given him or her. So our Lord tells us that we should not usurp for ourselves what does not belong to us, but rather recognize what has been given to us and recognize that it comes from God, embrace it, and live it in truth. So the truth alone sets us free, and when the truth is spoken in charity, it's always a lot more easy to accept. So let's seek to do that. Speak the truth, speak it in charity, and it makes it a lot easier to live and to speak and to accept. Praised be Jesus and Mary.